Good morning, everybody. My name is Bill Denslow. I'm a Connecticut licensed home inspector with Tiger Home and Building Inspections. Tiger's a family-owned business. They've been performing residential and commercial inspections throughout Connecticut, areas of Massachusetts and New York for about 25 years now. I have acquired some specialized training and certification in mold. Mold is generally disclaimed from the home inspection venue per the Connecticut standards, but specialized training is available for that. So this webinar will run about 30 minutes. It's a small part of a more comprehensive mold education series that we've developed. We do offer a 3-hour CE class and about a 1.5-hour in-office training module all about mold and a little history on mold, how to handle it, and what it means in the real estate transaction. So if you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them at the end of the presentation. Just go ahead and type them in. Usually there are a lot, so feel free. So we'll go ahead and get started here. Again, by way of introduction, I do have a number of certifications for mold. I'm a certified residential mold inspector, certified commercial mold inspector, certified mold investigator. I'm also a certified remediator. I'm a member of NORMI, the National Organization of Remediators and Mold Inspectors. I've been working in mold with Tiger for about 4 years, and previous to that with another company for some years down in Florida, Mold Central down there. I worked with the Connecticut utilities some time ago on their energy conservation programs, working with trying to get homes a little more efficient without affecting indoor air quality, mostly moisture. And as we'll find out, moisture is integral to the mold issues that we're looking at today. So I spent a long time dealing with indoor moisture control, indoor air quality problems, and mold. So what we're going to look at today is on your screen there are some questions. What is mold? What causes it? Why is it a problem? A little bit about testing. Who does the testing? Why bother to test? And how do we clean it up? How do we deal with it? There we go. Okay. First of all, what is mold? Well, it's a microscopic organism. It's found everywhere. It is just across the planet. There's really no getting away from it. As far as mold concerns, it's just a matter of how much mold have we got and what is your immune system going to do with that mold exposure. It does have a vital purpose in nature. It breaks down dead materials, mostly cellulose. It's vital to the working of nature. Without mold, we'd be in quite a bit of trouble out there. It'd be a completely different environment. Molds are types of fungi that live on organic-based materials. All mold is within the fungi kingdom. Not all fungi are mold, but all mold are fungi, if you remember your 8th grade biology classes. So as I said, mold is everywhere, and it is everywhere. I do a lot of air sampling or air testing, and I'll never, ever take a sample that does not have some mold spores in it. There's just no getting away from it. Again, it's just a matter of how much have you got, what is it, and how are you going to react to it. Mold has actually been a problem on the International Space Station. A couple of times they had mold infestations up there that they had to take care of. It's a problem down in Antarctic research stations. There's a lot of humidity and moisture problems down there. And when you get that type of problem, you're going to get mold following. So it needs moisture and oxygen to grow. We're going to go back to this time and time again. The moisture is what we can control. It also needs something to eat, and it will eat pretty much whatever it's growing on. So we can't really control what it will eat, and we can't control the air, but we can control the moisture in a home. And moisture is the key. If you have moisture problems in a home, you may well have mold problems. You're coming fast behind. Mold can actually be thought of as a symptom of moisture problems. So if you take care of the moisture problems, the mold will stop growing, then you can get rid of it, and that should take care of it. Mold is beneficial to us as well as to nature. There are a lot of drugs that are derived from mold. Penicillin is obviously the most well-known one. That comes from a particular species of penicillium. It's Penicillium dentatum. There's also Aspergillus terreus. That allows us to develop a number of statins for cholesterol control. Tolopaclatum inflatum is one mold that has some rather strong immunosuppressants derived from it. So, and there's also cheese, of course, and fermentation. So in the indoor environment, mold begins growing indoors when spores land on a damp or wet surface. Again, it needs that moisture to grow. Without the moisture, it simply won't grow. There are lots of different types of molds. There's actually hundreds of thousands of different species, but none of them will grow without a wet surface or high humidity environment. Molds emit spores into the air. That's how they spread. That's how they grow. They also give off gases, which are called volatile organic chemicals, or MVOC stands for microbial volatile organic chemicals. And they're just given off as part of the mold's digestion process. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. We can have allergic reactions to the spores and to the VOCs. Our immune system doesn't really like mold very much. It knows that mold is not good for us, so it attacks the mold when it gets into our systems. And that's where we begin to get into some health troubles. If our system gets overwhelmed or just overreacts to mold, you can have those allergic reactions. So here, moisture control is the key to mold control. If you take one thing away from this presentation, take this. Moisture is the key to mold control. Here's a graph. This is one of my favorite slides. This is a graph showing the relationship between relative humidity in a house and different things that will grow and can affect your health inside. If you look along the bottom of the graph, that's the relative humidity, or the percent RH. And if you look over on the left side, it's very low relative humidity, down around 10%. And then it goes up 20, 30, 40, 50, on up to 90% relative humidity. And then on the left side going down, we've got all sorts of neat little things here: bacteria, viruses, fungi, which we just found out includes mold, respiratory infections, allergic rhinitis, so on and so forth. If you look at the vertical line, excuse me, that says 50, that's at 50% relative humidity. And there's not a whole lot going on there. Things tend to taper off right around 50% relative humidity. If you look at bacteria, for example, the little triangles are the wide part of the triangle is where there's a lot of growth, and then it tapers down to almost nothing at about 30% relative humidity. And then it picks up again around 60% and increases from there. Viruses, the same pattern. Fungi or mold really doesn't even get going until around 60% humidity. And mites, respiratory infection, all the rest of this stuff tapers off right around 50%. So if you're trying to control relative humidity in a basement, you're trying to dry out a basement or an attic or the interior of the house, you want to aim for 50%. Not an easy thing to achieve in a damp basement, but that would be the ideal target. If you can get 55, even 60% in a basement, mold is going to have a very difficult time getting hold there and growing. This also begs the question of what is relative humidity? That is the amount of moisture in the air compared to how much moisture the air can hold. We all know that warm air can hold more moisture than cold air. So say the air is at 80 degrees and it has 50% relative humidity. That means it's holding half the moisture that it can. If we put more moisture in, then that relative humidity will go up even though the temperature stays the same. If the temperature goes down, say from 80 to 60 or 50, and the relative humidity, the humidity level stays the same, then the relative humidity will go up. And what happens is it gets to a point where the relative humidity will reach 100% as the temperature drops, and then the air reaches dew point, which means moisture condenses right out of it. This is why when you take say a glass of iced tea on a hot summer afternoon and you put it on a counter, and you come back 10 minutes later, there's water all over the glass, a big puddle underneath it. Well, that moisture condensed out of the air. It came literally right out of the thin air. And that's because the air, as it was rubbing against the cold glass, cooled down. Excuse me. The relative humidity went up to 100% as the air cooled down and moisture condensed right out of the air. So that's a good example of relative humidity. And you can either change the temperature or you can change the humidity, and you can affect the relative humidity. And again, that target is around 50% or so. That's ideal. And 50% humidity, by the way, is very good for us human beings. It's just not very good at all for mold and viruses and bacteria and other things we really don't want to deal with. All right, so moisture sources. There are a lot of sources in a house for moisture, more than most people realize. There's obviously the damp basements, the leaky basements, crawl spaces, roof leaks, siding leaks, window, door leaks. Inadequate attic ventilation is a big one. It won't necessarily cause leaks, but it will raise that relative humidity in attics to the point where you can get some mold growing on the backside of the roof sheathing or something like that. Plumbing leaks, of course, bath, showers create a tremendous amount of moisture in the house. Weak exhaust fans. A lot of bathrooms have fans, and a lot of those fans don't really do a whole lot. You don't just need a fan, you need a really good fan that's going to move a decent amount of air. Cooking puts a lot of moisture in the air. Plants, people watering the plants all the time. Well, a plant will use a little bit of that moisture, but most of it just evaporates back into the air. People and pets give off a lot of moisture also. And cold areas in a house, again, if you have a closet and it's closed off, it's near the front door, or an outside wall is in the closet or something like that, it'll cool down. And when that warm air gets in there, the air cools down, and we now know what's going to happen. It could reach dew point, and moisture can condense right out in the closet. And I see this all the time in closets, coat closets near the front door in a foyer or something like that. People put wet boots or raincoats in there, so there's a source of moisture. It's cold, the moisture condenses, and you've got mold growing. So there's a lot of areas, a lot of things that can cause that moisture. So how does mold affect our health? Why is this a problem? Well, it affects people by attacking the immune system, basically. And once it overwhelms the immune system, then it can get in and do more damage. Allergens and irritants, they cause allergic reactions in sensitive individuals. These are people that have hay fever type reactions to mold. Symptoms are sneezing, runny nose, red eyes, skin rash, the usual stuff that people suffer from mostly in the springtime. Asthma can be triggered by mold. Oddly enough, the overwhelming majority of people are not really allergic to mold much at all. They need a very, very high dose of it in order to show any reactions. Mold affects people differently depending on the degree of sensitivity. This is a problem with mold because we can't ever take a particular level of a particular mold and say, okay, this level is safe, but anything above that is not. Everybody has their own immune system. Everybody reacts differently to different molds at different exposure levels. A very light dose may not affect you at all, but if it gets a little bit heavier, it could run you into some trouble. So there's never going to be a set limit or level of safe exposure to mold. It just isn't going to work like that, and it's unfortunate, but that's just the way it is. Our immune systems are all different, and they work differently. So mold can colonize within our body if our immune system is suppressed. That's a lovely thought, but it's true. Our immune system, though, has to be suppressed. Our immune system does a pretty good job of getting rid of mold in our bodies, but if it's suppressed, if someone's on immunosuppressant medication because they just had surgery or a transplant or something like that, or they've got a disease that knocks down their immune system, those people are at very, very high risk for mold actually getting into the body, and it can colonize almost anywhere in the body. There's evidence now showing that mold can break through that blood-brain barrier and actually get into your brain and cause issues there. The thinking is that it may cause Alzheimer's type problems. It hasn't been proven yet, but there's a lot of evidence pointing that way. It can also colonize in your lungs. It can colonize past your lungs, your liver, kidneys, just about anywhere it wants to, depending on the type of mold. There are some molds that really enjoy getting into our bodies. There's one particular species of Aspergillus that causes aspergillosis, which is the Aspergillus mold growing in the lungs. And that's a real problem. A lot of doctors and hospitals really aren't tuned into that quite yet. So somebody goes in with symptoms that mimic cancer, and if they take an x-ray, it looks just like cancer in an x-ray, and it has been misdiagnosed as that in the past. It can be gotten rid of. There's antifungal medication that can be taken to get rid of it. It's not that hard to get rid of. It just has to be properly diagnosed. But anyway, that is very, very rare. Excuse me, very rare to have that happen. Again, you need something already having knocked down your immune system for that to be a problem. And then down at the bottom again, there will never be a safe level of mold exposure. As we talked about, there is no safe level that is across the board. So what is a mycotoxin? We talked about this a little bit before. VOCs, volatile organic compounds or chemicals. These are gases that the mold produces as it digests whatever it's growing on. In healthy people, the exposure has to be very high for adverse effects. When you walk into a basement, or maybe poke your head into a crawl space, or just walk into a house that's been vacant, closed up for some time, and you get that musty basement-y odor, that's VOCs. That's your first clue that there's a mold issue going on there. It's not just that the house has been closed up. It's not just that, well, it's a basement, what do you expect? It's mold. So it's just a matter of finding it and getting rid of it and then managing the moisture. The CDC states that there are approximately 1.5 million types of fungus. That's actually a bit of a dated statistic. There's probably up around 2 million right now. That's types of fungus, not mold, by the way. 300 are known to make people sick, and it's a very, very small percentage of fungi. Most fungi, including molds, don't affect us all that much, but there is that small portion that can really do some damage to us and make us pretty uncomfortable in our own homes. Here's some of the most common molds. I see these all the time in the testing that I do. There's Cladosporium, Penicillium alternaria, and Aspergillus. Those, by the way, are genera. Each one of those is a genus of mold. Within that genus, there are many, many, many species. Aspergillus, for example, I think has over 200 species. Penicillium, same thing, 200 and some odd species that have been identified so far. A lot of these have not been researched at all. Mold research is ongoing. They're working as fast as they can to try to identify these things and determine, you know, how much of a threat these things are. But the majority of these molds really just aren't well studied at all. And then down at the bottom, Stachybotrys. That was on this list. It's not really a common mold. It's found often enough to be a concern. Stachybotrys is considered a toxic mold or toxigenic mold. Somehow, well, actually, I know how. It's become the darling of the internet crowd. If you do any search for mold, especially black mold, you're going to come up with all kinds of horror stories on Stachybotrys. It is just a mold. It's not a healthy mold at all. It is a concern if it's found in a house, but it can be gotten rid of as easily as any other mold. By the way, when we do testing, we don't test, or we don't have the lab identify the mold down to the species level, only the genera. It's not really necessary to do that in a real estate transaction. And it's much more expensive and time consuming to try to do that because the lab has to actually grow some of the mold. They can't look at the spores and identify the species, only the genus. So generally the genus is just fine unless there's some really specific concerns. So we do test down to the genus level. So to test or not to test? Well, the EPA, CDC, OSHA, the Connecticut DPH, they all agree on one thing. It's more important to locate and fix the source of the water problem and then to get rid of the mold. More important to do those two things than to identify what the mold is, and that's absolutely true. Mold is mold, and we just kind of want to get rid of it. There are times when I've gone out to a house to do a mold investigation, and I won't do testing in, say, the basement because there's mold all over the place. There's no need to test. There's no need to spend somebody's money on lab analysis when we already know what that's going to show us. There are other times, however, when it is important to test, and it can tell us what we can't see or smell. As I said, the molds give off those VOCs, but not all molds do that. So if you walk into a house and you don't smell anything, it's not a guarantee that there is no mold there. There may still be some mold going on there. A lot of times I'm called out to kind of quantify the scope of the problem. Someone knows they have mold in the basement, but they don't know what's going on upstairs as far as how many spores have collected up there. So I will come in, I'll do testing throughout the house, and then the results will come back and we can see whether or not when a remediator comes in to get rid of the mold in the basement, whether or not he needs to get upstairs and do a lot of cleaning or HEPA vacuuming or whatever. So it's very, very valuable in that aspect. We need to remember that the spores they are microscopic. We can't see them, we can't smell them or taste them, and the only way to really know what's there as far as what type of mold and the quantity is to do testing. So that will also guide the remediators in their work. It'll set some parameters for them. Be okay, well, you guys only need to work in the basement because everything else came up clean, or no, you need to get up onto the first floor because the spore levels were elevated there. So testing is valuable in that aspect. And peace of mind. A lot of times I'll come out and people have spent you know, the past couple of days researching mold on the internet, and their hair's standing on end and they're terrified. They just want to know, do they have a mold problem or don't they? So there is a large peace of mind aspect to this. When to test? Well, if a person has allergies or an immunocompromised situation, they definitely want to test to find out what's going on. If there's a history of water concerns in the house, the basement is chronically damp or leaky all the time, people have been storing things down there, who knows what, cardboard boxes, books, things that really shouldn't be there. That's a good time to test. Post-remediation testing, that's when a remediator comes out. He will take care of the mold issues, and then we need something to determine whether or not he did the job that he was hired to do. Well, that's post-remediation testing. I'll come in and I'll test the air, visually look around, maybe take some tape lift samples, and make sure that he got all the mold out and that the air is clean and that the moldy, whatever it was removed. So when a remediator will need the information, again, this goes back to quantifying the scope of the problem, and then when requested by the buyer. If the buyer wants it done, it probably is a peace of mind thing, and it's probably best to go ahead and do it. They may have other reasons to do it also, so if they want it, we should probably give it to them. So who does the testing? Well, they should be qualified, obviously. They should be trained on it. They should have some type of certification. There's no state or federal licensing, no state licensing in Connecticut. There are some states that do have it. California, Texas, Florida, to name a few. New York, I believe, just came on board with that. Connecticut will eventually, but right now they don't. So there's no licensing. There's very little control, if any, in the field of testing and remediation. So you need to be careful that whoever you have come out is qualified, that they have some training on it and some type of certification from you know, lab training, or there are a bunch of groups out there that kind of self-regulate the industry. They should not be a remediator. The last thing in the world we want is a remediator come out and test for mold. They have a bit of a vested interest in finding mold. I'd like to say that none of them ever do that, but I can't say that. So a remediator, most remediators, if you ask them, they will say, no, 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 we don't do any testing. You need a third party to do that. And that's the correct response. Mold investigations is disclaimed from the home inspection procedure. That's per the Connecticut state standards for home inspections. Mold is disclaimed from the home inspection. So if you have a home inspector come out to check for mold, excuse me, they may be very, very highly qualified to do that, but they do need special training and some type of qualifications to do that, because just a regular home inspector will not have received the training for that as part of his home inspection training. So you have to be a little bit careful there. But a you know, a licensed home inspector is a good combination, along with some mold training and certification. The home inspector part of his investigation will be able to deal with the water issues, the moisture penetration, and then of course the mold investigator part will be able to handle the mold and do the sampling correctly and make sure the samples get off to the lab without being contaminated, all that kind of good thing. So it's a very, very good combination. There are also environmental companies that offer mold testing, and I'm sure they are very qualified to do the testing and sampling and lab report interpretation and all that stuff. However, they tend not to address the moisture issues, and again, the moisture is the underlying problem. The mold is just the symptom. There's a lot of IAQ specialists around, very, very, very highly trained people on indoor air quality. They probably tell you more than you want to know about the air quality in the home. But they have the same problem. They don't address the moisture issues. And again, that's the key. That's the real problem that needs to be addressed. The mold is the symptom. So a little bit about mold sampling and analysis, how this works. There's different types of sampling. There's air sampling, surface sampling. That's in the form of swabs and tapes. There's dust sampling, bulk sampling, settlement plates, and viable sampling. We'll run through these briefly one by one here. Air sampling is typically done with an air pump. That's that big black and green box there. And the little thing sitting on top of it is called an air cassette. And the diagram there shows how that works. It's a very specific amount of air is drawn in through that air cassette. And inside there, there's a little tiny sticky plate. And whatever's in the air gets slung out and stuck onto that plate. When it gets off to the lab will break it open, get that little plate out of there and look at it under a microscope. They will identify the spores and then they count them. Not a fun task, but somebody's got to do it. And then they produce the report from that. So basically, it's just an inertial impaction device. Oops. Here we go. The air has to be collected through a calibrated pump. The lab needs to know how much air passed through that in order to determine how many spores per cubic meter of air we're looking at. So those little cassettes can collect air inside. They also have to collect one outside sample. That is done so that we can compare the indoor to the outdoor. It's always a comparison. As I said, there's always going to be spores in the air, inside or outside, doesn't matter. We need to compare the outside to the inside and make sure that the inside spores are pretty much the same as outside and that they're at a lower level. So when all that is sent in, the final report should contain the lab report, an interpretation of the lab report, and recommendations as to how to proceed from there. So we looked at that slide. Surface sampling looks like a giant Q-tip there. That goes off to, like it's sealed up, goes off to the lab. They look at that. The bottom photo there is taking a taped lip sample, which is just a piece of tape that's stuck onto the mold, and then it gets put onto a glass slide, goes back to the lab, and they look at that and identify the spores. Try to get a feel for how heavy the concentration is or whether or not it looks like active growth. Petri settlement plates, I don't really recommend those. I don't do those. They don't give an accurate representation of conditions. It's just a plate that gets set out, spores settle on it, then it goes off to the lab. They try to grow whatever they can. Not a very accurate representation of conditions. Hermes vacuum samples, we don't do that for residential unless it's specifically requested. It's a form of testing that's kind of in development right now. You may run into it now and again, but we don't generally do that. And viable sampling is we need to grow something, and that again, as I said, we don't generally do that in a real estate transaction. It is available though. The lab, it's important to find out what lab is used. Labs do need to be accredited. They should be a nationally recognized accredited lab. The lab is the one that's interpreting these samples, so it's very, very important that they have all the proper accreditations. And the final report, again, from whoever did the mold investigation should contain the lab report, an interpretation of that report, because they're supposed to be the experts on that, and recommendations on how to proceed. Without those things, if your client or you just get a lab report, it may not mean a whole lot. You call the lab to talk to them, they won't talk to you because you're not their client, whoever took the samples is, so you get kind of stuck that way. This is a quick sample of a lab report. All the lab reports are different, but they have the same information. This is an air sample. It was taken outdoors. You can see that there. All this other information just kind of defines the type of sample. And then these are the raw counts. This is how many spores they found. These are the molds. This one, Aspergillus penicillium, we had a raw count of 96 in the finished basement, and yet outside we only had 35. So this is an indicator of indoor mold growth. This is the kind of thing we need to watch out for. So basically, this is the basic information. How many spores per cubic meter? That's the number that the lab can derive by looking at the raw count and how much air passed through that sample, in this case 150 liters. They can run those numbers to a little formula and they get their count per meter cubed here. That's how many spores per meter cubed there are in the air. This percent of total, we can pretty much ignore that. That doesn't have anything germane to say to this report as far as the consumer is concerned. It's just the percentage of These particular spores are 14.9% of the total number of spores found in the sample. This is what the tape lift sample looks like. This first one up on top was taken to well equipment. They did find cladosporium mold, very heavy concentration of it, and many mycelial fragments. If there's a lot of mycelial fragments, those are kind of analogous to branches or roots on the mold, and if there's a lot of that, that indicates this is probably very active growth. And then down below, basement floor joist, another sample, they found ascospores, just a few of them, and no mycelial fragments at all. So this probably is not active. Aspergillus penicillium, they found very, very few spores and just a trace of mycelial fragments. So this is probably active, but a very, very light concentration, not too much of an issue. Should be taken care of, but not a big deal. So you got mold. What do? Well, the first thing you want to do is get an education on mold. The beginning of it right here. There are a number of government websites, the DPH for one, Connecticut Department of Public Health. They did a wonderful job in writing up a lot of literature on mold. It's designed for the homeowner, and it's really actually very well-written stuff. So this is one spot you can go to get a little bit of more information about mold. So they have this document, Mold Guidance for the Real Estate Banking and Insurance Communities. This is a fact sheet, get the mold out. Look these up if you get a chance. Just go to the DPH website, search for mold, and both of these documents are very, very well written. This is something that the DPH got together. This just deals with how much contamination. Less than 10 square feet is considered level 1. This is a homeowner cleanup job. If it's less than 10 square feet, they say a homeowner can handle it, as long as they give themselves a little bit of an education on how to do that. Level 2, 3, 4, larger and larger areas, this is when you'd want to call in a remediator. And then when ductwork gets involved, that's level 5 to 6, and we would need some type of specialist coming in for that, just to handle the problems in the ductwork. I'm going to pause just for a sec. Okay, we're back. When you have a remediator come out, the question is, how do you know the guy knows what he's doing when there's no licensing, nothing? Well, it's a problem. But there are a couple of things you can ask. The first question you want to ask is, do you guys do testing? If they say, oh yeah, we do our own testing, then you may want to say thank you and just kind of hang up and find somebody else. Because as I said before, we don't want a remediator that does their own testing. At the beginning, they're invested in finding mold, and then if they're going to do their own post-remediation testing, they're very interested in not finding mold. So there's a conflict of interest there, and you really can't get any good assurance that the testing is going to be accurate. You also want to ask them, what remediation protocol do you guys follow? And usually they'll say, well, I follow the IICRC S520 guidelines. That's a set of guidelines set up by the Institute for Inspection, Cleaning, and Restoration. Again, they're a self-regulating body, but they've done a wonderful job on setting up all kinds of protocol for remediators. And it tells them what to do step by step, how to do it, and do it right so that nobody gets hurt, nobody gets exposed to a lot of mold, and all the mold gets taken out of the house. There are other protocols also. New York City set up one from the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. That's a very good one also. Connecticut has their own set of standards, but they just refer back to the IICRC standards. So if you want to look at that at all, if you can find a copy, it's interesting. It's a very long document, but it is kind of interesting. But again, that's a question to ask a remediator. If they say, no, we don't do testing, we will never do testing, and they tell you, we do follow the IICRC or the NYC standards, those are big pluses in their column. The NADCA ACR, this is for duct cleaning. It's a whole other set of standards for cleaning ducts. And I don't really generally recommend that ducts be cleaned, but if there's been flooding issues and the ducts got wet, or if there's other conditions where we know there's mold growing in the ducts, they definitely do need to be cleaned. And again, mold remediation is based upon removing the source of the problem, preventing it from reoccurring, that's dealing with the moisture, and cleaning up any residue. These guys clean and clean and clean and clean and clean after they get rid of the mold to make sure that all those spores are gone. They're not just hanging around in a carpet or and a bunch of dust on top of a windowsill or something like that. So what does a remediator do? He gets all dressed up in his moon suit there. It looks really scary when these guys are working on a house, but all that equipment really is just to protect them. They're dealing with mold in large quantities, and they need to protect themselves. So a good remediator will get rid of the mold and also address the source of moisture. Some remediators do that, some do not. They're going to tell you, we'll get rid of the mold, but you're on your own for getting rid of the moisture. You need to get some other contractor in for that. And that's fine. That's not technically a remediator's job. But the better companies will do that also. So they isolate the area that's being worked on. They'll set up big plastic sheets and enclose it so that as they're disturbing the mold, the spores don't go flying off into other areas. They remove the contaminated materials. They get the mold out of the house. That's critical. That's a basic tenet of mold remediation. They remove all the mold, and then they just clean everything. Here's a couple of other pictures. In the upper left there, you can see the guy scrubbing some mold off a wood wall stud. He's got plastic up there behind him so the spores don't go off into an area that's not under control. On the right side, that big silver box there is a negative air machine. They're actually filtering the air and then blowing it outside. They've created a low pressure area where they're working. So as any spores get out into the air, they're sucked up by this machine and blown right outdoors. Mold outdoors, by the way, is fine. It's not like asbestos or lead where it has to be disposed of properly. Once the mold gets outside the house, it's a natural part of the ecosystem. You can do anything you want with it. So blowing spores outside is just fine. It's not going to hurt anybody. Then down in the lower left there, that big blue box, that's an air scrubber. And they run these also, and they just constantly filter the air while they're working so they can get more of those spores out of the air. And by the time they're all done, the spores are all gone. So basically, mold remediation is assessment, containment, and removal. That's about it. Not a fun job, but somebody's got to do it. After remediation, you'd want to think about post-remediation testing. It's the only way to make sure that the job was done right. Again, the spores can't be seen, they can't be tasted or smelled. The only way to know is to do more sampling and have a mold investigator, mold inspector come out and take a look around also. If there's a lot of dust still around, well, then their job is not done. Wherever they were working really should be very, very, very clean. So a couple of myths about mold when we wind up here. There are a lot of misconceptions about mold. We're going to take a look at a few of them here. This isn't toxic mold, which is also known as black mold. There actually is no category of molds called black mold. That's a urban myth or an internet myth. Most often when people talk about black mold, they're talking about Stachybotrys. But even Stachybotrys is not always black. There are lots and lots of different molds. They come in all colors of the rainbow. There are plenty of black molds that are not at all toxic. Unfortunately, Stachybotrys happens to be black most often, and that is a toxic mold, but that's how that myth got started. Molds will change color depending on what they're growing on, depending on their environment. They can change colors. They can be black one day, gray, red, green. So the color has absolutely no relationship to the toxicity of any mold. It's not mold, it's just mildew. This is where when I'm giving the presentation, I always ask who can tell me the difference between mold and mildew. I'm sorry I can't ask you that because I would like to hear the answers. There is no difference except in the spelling. Mold and mildew are the same thing. Mildew is mold. You could consider mold mildew if you wanted to, but they're the exact same thing. It's safe to clean it myself. Well, we saw that slide before with the level 1, 2, 3. If it's a small area and you kind of know what you're doing and you know you're not going to contaminate other areas by cleaning that up and you've got the right materials to do that, yeah, it probably is. But if the if it's gotten into 3 or 4 areas or it's a large area, probably is not, because you just don't have the equipment and the expertise to take care of that. So when in doubt, it's best to call a remediator. But even if you're going to clean up a small area, it's good to go on the websites, the EPA and the DPH, and read up on how to do it. They tell you what you can do as a homeowner to effectively get rid of that stuff. I want to make sure that my house is free of mold. I get this a lot when not a lot, but quite often when I come out to do a mold investigation, I always ask, well, why am I here? What are the concerns? What's the issue? And sometimes I'll get, well, there's no issues really. I just want to make sure there's absolutely no mold in my house. and then we have to sit down and have a conversation about how mold is everywhere, and there's really no getting away from it. It's just a matter of how much have you got, how does it compare to the outdoor sample, and you know, what is your immune system going to do to it? So no house is completely free of mold, and never will be. Any remediator will tell you that. So they're coming outside, and they're always going to be coming inside. I cleaned the mold with bleach, so I fixed the problem. No, you haven't. Mold is ineffective for a number of different reasons, but most obviously, when you go to buy a gallon of bleach, you're buying about 95% water and around 5%, 5-6% bleach. It's very, very highly diluted. So if you spread that onto an area that's porous, a wall or a piece of wood or something that has mold on it, the water will soak in, but the bleach doesn't soak in very much at all, and it evaporates off pretty quick. So you wipe it down, and what you ended up doing was basically watering your mold. You can get the surface stuff off just by wiping it off, but the again, those mycelial fragments, the mycelia and the hyphae, which again are like roots, they will still be in the wood or the material, and the mold will come back. Bleach just isn't very effective. No mold remediation protocol, like the IICRC recommends bleach, and none of them will recommend that you use bleach. It just doesn't work very well. So that's it for MIST. Here's some resources, the EPA, Connecticut.gov, the CDC, and of course Tiger inspections. Also, we have information on mold on our website. So I'll give you a minute to write those down. That, I believe, is about it for our slides. So we'll see if we've got any questions here, or if anybody is still out there. Okay, there are some questions here. We'll take them as they came in. If I can call them up here. Give me just a minute. We'll just have to start again.
Okay, my apologies to everybody who is still on board. Just now seeing the comments about not being able to see the slides. That was my error. Apparently my screen paused. But I believe we can have this PowerPoint available to you afterwards. I will gladly email it if that's okay with Bill and Kip. But we do have a couple of other questions on here with regards to the actual presentation, so I'm going to turn things back over to Bill for answers.
Okay, sorry about that. But anyway, we've got a question here for Bob. Would black mold growing on a wall in an apartment and has been there for a period of time, then cleaned up, cause hair loss? There was an outfit on the web that speaks to people getting mold in their bodies. They speak to having their outfit to test your urine and blood for mycotoxins and cytotoxins. These tests are not covered by insurance. They're about $800 each. Is this a scam? Wow. I've never heard of any link between hair loss and mold. That's a new one on me. I don't think there would be a correlation there at all. As far as the tests, urine and blood for mycotoxins and cytotoxins, there are tests that can be done for that. I think there would be some trouble tracing those mycotoxins back to an actual mold problem. I'm not sure that that a lab would be able to do that. So is it a scam? I don't know. But I would tend to shy away from that. I would take that question to a doctor or an allergist and ask them about that. That's a new one. If it is linked to hair loss, I'd like to know about it because I could use some help in that department. All right, some other questions we've got here. I had a client that had ceiling damage due to an ice dam. The ceiling was promptly repaired, and there has been no subsequent issues because now they rake the roof and adjust the gutters. Is there a risk of mold in the insulation and rafters? What's the best way to handle this? If you have an ice dam, or really any one-time water intrusion event, and things are cleaned up and dried out fairly quickly, within 2 or 3 days, you should be just fine. Mold needs a consistent source of moisture to really get hold and get going. Mold can grow pretty quick. There are some molds that within 2 days, they can get a viable colony going. There's others that most of them take a little bit longer than that. But again, if you've got just a one-time occurrence, the water got in, you took care of the source of the problem, dried things out, you should be just fine. Another question, I see what appears to be mold on the roof sheathing in the attic. What's happening here and what should I do about this condition? Yeah, this is very common. I mentioned attic ventilation earlier. A lot of attics in older homes are not very well ventilated, and then when people add insulation to make the house more efficient, they actually increase the temperature difference between the living area and the attic. So if you've got even warmer air, which again can hold more moisture, working its way up into an attic, which is even colder now because of the added insulation, you get faster dew point temperatures occurring and more moisture condensing out. The moisture will condense out on the coldest thing it can find, which up in an attic is the backside of the roof. So all late fall, winter, or even early spring, the backside of that roof is wet. And mold is up there, and mold starts growing because it's got a food source, which is the roof sheathing, and it's got its moisture, which is all that condensation occurring. So the solution is to increase the attic ventilation. Nowadays, most new construction is going with soffit and ridge vents, which does a really, really good job of controlling that moisture. That also begs the question, does that mold need to be taken care of? I would have to see that in order to figure that out. If it's very, very light, once you get rid of the moisture, the mold will go dormant. It won't die, it won't go away, but it will stop growing and giving off spores. So if the attic is well vented, the spores that it does give off, spores that shake off it while it's dormant, will probably just vent outside and won't be an issue. If it's a really heavy, heavy growth, then yeah, a remediator should be brought out to get rid of that. Another question, there's a small 1 foot by 1 foot area of black fuzzy growth on the sheetrock wall beneath my basement stairs. Is it black mold? Please provide suggestions on how to proceed in removing it. I would like to do it myself. Well, you probably can do it yourself if it's just a 1 by 1 square area. Again, the question, is it black mold? Well, again, there's no such category of black molds. If it's colored black, then yeah, it's a black mold, but it's not, within some dreaded group of toxic black molds. It may be Stachybotrys. I don't know. We'd have to have a lab tell us. You cannot identify mold just by looking at it, as far as the genus or even more the species. But a small area like that, you can do it. But you do need to bear in mind that if you get rid of that mold and just walk away from it, it will be back unless you take care of the moisture. You've got a damp basement or something going on to provide that area with enough moisture to let the mold grow. So you've got to get rid of that moisture as well. One more question here. Hang on, let's see. Okay, one more question. I've been getting headaches and a scratchy throat whenever I'm home, but I get better when I go to work. I've looked around for mold, but don't see any or smell any. I don't spend a lot of time in the finished basement. Could there be something else going on? Well, yeah, headaches and scratchy throats are fairly common symptoms of allergic response to mold. It could be something else, but it may well be mold as well. You mentioned a finished basement. Whenever I get into a house and I'm as a home inspector or as a mold investigator and I see a finished basement, I kind of go on high alert because most finished basements have carpeting on the floor, which if it's set right on the concrete, it's going to be damp. It won't feel damp, but the humidity in that will be quite high because it's sitting on the concrete floor and absorbing moisture from it. It's a perfect environment for mold. It's got enough moisture to get going. There's a lot of dust in the carpeting, lots of stuff for the mold to eat. And quite often, if it's growing in the carpet, you won't see it. But every time you walk across the carpeting, you'll disturb it and spores will come flying up into the air. So yeah, it's entirely possible that there may be some mold going on here that's not giving off a lot of VOCs and you're not able to smell it. The only way to know for sure is to have somebody come out and do some sampling, but that's really the only way to tell. But if you go home and you start having symptoms and you go away from home, you go to work or whatever, and those symptoms go away, there's definitely something going on there in the house, and some air sampling probably will help rule in or rule out mold at least. But chances are it probably is mold. So I think that's about it for the questions. Again, apologies for the confusion here on the slides, but this will be available to you. And we'll make sure that that everybody gets to see all of these slides. So that's about it. Thank you very much for your attendance. And again, if there's any other questions that occur, I was going to say I'll give you one more slide here, but that's not going to help because most of you weren't able to see it. Feel free to visit us at tigerinspect.com. You can email questions in there. They'll get forwarded to me, and I'll do my best to get back to you. So thank you very much.